Hello there, my name is Helen McGrath and I'm the statistician working on the Sexual Violence Survey. And in this presentation today I'm going to go through some of the key points from the latest publication from that survey. That publication, Sexual Violence Survey 2022 Attitudes to Sexual Violence, is going to focus on the levels of agreement with certain statements on sexual violence and the perception of the population towards how common sexual violence is in Ireland. This short report today represents the final publication from the kind of formal dissemination process for this survey. And as I've mentioned previously, this is a complex and challenging survey which involved a collection of some very personal and private information, and in many cases it involved respondents recounting difficult and painful experiences of sexual violence and sexual harassment. So we would like to thank sincerely all of the participants who shared their story with us. So in this presentation, I'm just going to reiterate some of the background of the survey. I'm going to talk through some of the key results, and I'm just going to conclude with some final remarks. So this all began with the report of the Scoping Group on Sexual Violence Data, which was published in 2018. And a key recommendation in that was that a comprehensive national survey on the prevalence of sexual violence should be undertaken. It's been 20 years since we've last had data in Ireland on this, and there's a strong societal and policy interest in knowing more about the prevalence levels of sexual violence in Ireland. So this is part of our official statistics and has been embedded in our work plan for repeat in 10 years' time. So just a few observations on surveys like this. So surveys on sexual violence only are few. So you must be aware of how, questions were introduced to respondents in order to get a better sense of the prevalence of sexual violence. And it's clearly a sensitive topic, and underreporting risk has to be managed throughout the survey. And you must be very careful in how you ask questions in this sensitive topic. Research shows that society's awareness of violence can impact on the reported or disclosed levels of violence in society. And it would be completely natural to want to go and compare the data in this publication with data from other surveys, but we'd strongly caution against that. There are a range of methodological reasons as to why it's hard to compare, and the differing levels of society's awareness across time and between countries can also impact on this. And the CSO appreciates that behind the data in today's publication are a range of individual stories which speak to the lived experience of both of those who have and have not experienced sexual violence. So I'm just going to reiterate some key points on the data collection summary. So this is a prevalence survey, not an incidence survey. So it has overall details on prevalence, but it isn't an exhaustive list of all the experiences someone will have gone through. This was generated using a nationally representative sample. So this is a mix of ages of men and women all across Ireland, where we had no knowledge of their background or their prior lived experience. This was an individual-based survey, so it was asked directly of individuals, those who were aged 18 and over. And we had three modes or three ways of engaging with the survey. We had online survey, self-completion on the tablet, which was facilitated by the interviewer, but where the interviewer was not present, or finally a paper survey. And I suppose the common thread that wove those three modes together was self-completion. So allowing people the space and privacy in order to share their very sensitive experiences with us. So overall, we got about 4,500 responses to the survey. So just talking about this particular publication and just to outline some of the differences between this and previous publications. So the data in this report is focused solely on those who have not experienced sexual violence in their lifetime, nor have they experienced sexual harassment in the last 12 months. And the rationale behind this is looking at, I suppose, the kind of ethical responsibilities that we had in the office to ensure to reduce harm towards respondents. So we've asked these types of questions only of those who have not experienced sexual violence or harassment. Please also be aware of the placement of the module, and what I mean by that is where the questions were asked within the survey. So the questions on attitudes to sexual violence were placed at the end of the survey. So just to be aware that respondents will have gone through about 32 questions, detailing various sexual violence and sexual harassment experiences before they come to this set of questions, and that may have induced some form of bias within the results, but it still provides an interesting insight into society's perception of sexual violence and their levels of agreement with certain statements on sexual violence as well. So just to, I suppose, reiterate, we've had several dissemination events with various publications relating to the Sexual Violence Survey, and you can find all the details on this slide. So just to look at some of the key themes from this publication. So again, remembering that this was only asked of those who had experienced no sexual violence in their lifetime nor sexual harassment, that women were more likely to think that sexual violence is common in Ireland than men. So more women, 86% of them, than men, which is 72%, thought that sexual violence against women was common. Women were also more likely than men to think sexual violence against men was more common. Most disagree with the statement. If a person who's been raped is not visibly upset by the experience, it probably was not rape. So overall, almost 9 in 10, or 87% of adults, disagreed with that statement, compared with just 2% of adults who did agree with it. There are greater levels of uncertainty with the statement. Women often make up or exaggerate reports of rape. So interesting, almost a third of men, so 31%, and a quarter of women, so 25% of them, were uncertain with that statement. And we also found that most agreed with the statement that men may be too embarrassed to say that they have been raped. So the majority of men, so 80%, and women, 82%, agreed with that statement. So just to remind you of some of the headline results from our main results publication, just to remind you that what we had found was 26% of adults in Ireland have experienced sexual violence as an adult, 29% of adults have experienced sexual violence as a child, and 40% of adults in Ireland had experienced sexual violence at some point in their lifetime. And just to remind you that there was a clear kind of sex difference in these results, where we can see that males were less likely than females to experience sexual violence, was as an adult, as a child, or in their lifetime. And you can see the differences there, where 12% of males have experienced sexual violence as an adult, compared with 39% of females. 22% of males had experienced sexual violence as a child, compared with 36% of females. And 28% of males had experienced sexual violence in their lifetime, compared with 52% of females. So looking at the level of agreement with the statement, if the person who has been raped is not visibly upset by the experience, it probably was not rape. So what we can see here is that 87% of people have indicated that they disagree with that statement. 10% of adults who had not experienced sexual violence or sexual assault were uncertain about that statement, and then only 2% agreed with the statement. Looking at the level of agreement with the statement, women often make up or exaggerate reports of rape. What we can see here again, for those aged 18 and over who did not experience sexual violence or sexual harassment, we can see a different pattern. So while the vast majority do disagree with that statement, we can see greater levels of uncertainty, with 29% of people indicating that they were uncertain, and 8% of people indicated that they agreed with this statement. Looking then at the level of agreement with the statement, men may be too embarrassed to say that they have been raped. So what we can see here is 80% of adults who did not experience sexual violence or sexual harassment indicated that they agreed with this statement, with 15% saying that they were uncertain and 4% disagreeing. What's interesting with these statements, and looking at the levels of agreement or disagreement or uncertainty, is just to get a sense of people's perception of kind of sexual violence, and also what kind of implications that might have for levels of prevalence. As I've noted already, that society's awareness can have an effect on the reported or disclosed levels of violence in society. So just looking at the kind of perception of how common people might think sexual violence is. So looking at the question in general, how common do you think sexual violence is in Ireland? We're just looking here at the results for men. So men who are aged 18 and over who do not experience sexual violence or sexual harassment. So 72% of men thought that sexual violence against women was common, compared to 27% of men who thought that sexual violence against women was not common. Looking at their opinion of how common sexual violence is against men, 31% of men indicated that they felt it was common, compared with 67% of men who thought sexual violence against men was not common. When we look at the data for females, we see a slightly different picture, where 86% of women who did not experience sexual violence or sexual harassment indicated that they felt sexual violence against women was common, compared with 13% of women who thought that sexual violence against women was not common. Looking at the picture for how common sexual violence is against men, what we can see here is that 53% of women thought that sexual violence against men was common, compared with 44% of women who thought sexual violence against men was not common. So this is just, I suppose, a whistle-stop tour of some of the main points from this short report from the Sexual Violence Survey. And I'm just going to conclude that this is the final publication in our kind of formal dissemination schedule, but we will be looking at further information that we'll be able to publish from the survey over the next 6 to 12 months. We really again like to thank all of the respondents for their engagement on this very sensitive survey. It's been a real team effort across the system, particularly with help from the Department of Justice who funded this survey, and we've had really good strong support from the NGO support service community throughout, and we'd like to thank all of their help in getting us to this stage. So if you have any questions or queries or anything, you can see my contact details there.